Welcome to another discussion video and for this month, once again I am back with James Beard. Thank you for joining me.
Good to be here.
For this week, or this month rather, I think the best way to start is, I don't know if you heard about a little backstage incident that happened at Summerslam. You know, first, did you hear about the finish to the Summerslam main event with Brock and Randy?
Yes, I did.
What is your take on the finish?
Well, I'm pretty sure that it's pretty much the way it was planned. Other than that, I'm sure that they didn't expect quite as severe an injury. It was all said and done.
Yeah. Because from what I heard, that's actually why Randy wasn't at Backlash, because he was still recovering from SummerSlam.
That's probably right. It looked like he had a pretty good gash on top of his head.
Yeah. Do you think that the finish was uncalled for, or do you think that, it worked, or?
It's hard to say. I think, not knowing for sure what they're thinking about, just from my experience and from what I know of them, and from my best guess would be that the idea was to have a finish that was shocking and brutal, and get the reaction that they got, which was pretty much quiet, kind of what we used to call white heat type response to the people. You don't hear a lot of cheering. It's almost deafening quiet. And I think they probably were aiming for something similar to that. I'm sure that they probably didn't expect the degree of injury to Randy, but I still think they probably accomplished what they were trying to accomplish. Whether or not it was a good idea or not, I'm going to have to see. If it feels makes money, then I guess it's a good idea.
Mm-hmm.
That's usually the criteria for wrestling.
Yeah. Back to SummerSlam. After maybe a couple days after the event, news came out of a backstage altercation between Chris Jericho and Brock Lesnar. Because of what happened, and Jericho not liking or thinking that Randy didn't know about the finish, and that it was, something screwy, let's put it that way. And go ahead.
In this day and time, you never know exactly, what's the truth and what's not the truth.
Yeah.
I think a lot of times what happens with reporting and insider kinds of things is that they try to manipulate that to some degree themselves. And sometimes they'll try to swerve even the guys that are doing the reporting. So it could be something that was totally set up, and it could be something that was and maybe it was a legit issue with Chris. I don't know. Maybe he felt like Brock was unsafe and went overboard with it. I don't know. That's one of those things that you just have to. There's going to be all kinds of opinions about it. Who knows what the truth is? It's possible that Chris could have confronted him and been legitimately angry, and it's possible that could be something they let slip out just to make it feel a little bit more real.
Well, I'm not going to retell the story for anybody that doesn't know about the story. You can either check a dirt sheet, or I believe I talked about it the week after it happened, a little bit in I want to say when I was talking to somebody else in another video, so you can look for that. But what I wanted to take was two pieces from it. And first, the news, the reporters said that Hunter, Triple H, stood up for Chris Jericho and backed him up, saying that Brock escalated the situation. To me, it seems like Hunter is standing up for the wrestler. You know, the boys. Like, is that? I mean, I don't know if I know you never worked with Vince, but is that like a different mentality for a promoter?
Well, I actually have to understand how they think, and that's the reason I said what I said. It could very well be it's totally manipulated, and it could be that Chris thought, like I said, Chris may have thought he went overboard with it, and maybe Hunter did too. I don't know. I mean, that's one of those things nobody will ever know really the truth, and I think that comes from the fact that we got kind of a situation with wrestling and the media where almost too much is known, almost too many things are let out, and you already know where they're headed and what they're trying to do, and a lot of times people even know what the finishes are and what the outcomes are going to be, and or at least a pretty good idea of it. And I think it's gotten to a point where it's almost a cat and mouse game with the media and WWE, and Vince kind of likes to play those games sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
You know, who knows? I mean, who knows what the real truth is? And then it's got to a point where now that's what you expect. Something like this happens, and then you're going to get all this reporting and everything. And that may be exactly what they're looking for. Who knows?
Mm-hmm. Well, the original reason why I brought it up, or was going to bring it up with you, is because it also said that Chris was basically the leader of the locker room and was standing up for the locker room, you know, standing up for one of the boys. I wanted to know if that still exists in, like...
That could be true. And, you know, that could very well be what it is. And you know, and it could be one of those deals where Chris thought it just went too far. And you know, you have those guys in the locker room. And those are the guys that generally kind of oversee everybody else and make sure they police things a little bit, that kind of thing. And they'll call people down if they think they've done something wrong. And that's what they're supposed to be doing. It's their job. It's part of their job.
Mm-hmm.
What they're expected. And if that was the case, then all you can say is Chris was, you know, standing up for what he believed. You know, if that was true. And again, who knows? You never know. And we may never know.
Yeah, that's true. Well, because I know that you know, I know Taker used to be the guy who handled wrestlers' court, or the locker room leader, and I know it was big also in the 80s where you had the guy who, you know, the leader in the locker room. You know, from your experiences, does that still exist in, like, the smaller companies, or is that usually just when a veteran's around?
Well, I mean, every company I've ever been around, if they were established and had a fairly consistent roster, they had guys like that in there. And we had them in Dallas, and had them in Japan, had them everywhere I've ever been. You know, they're kind of the guys that looked up to and expected to call people down when the time comes, if it need be, or talk to people when it needs to do a certain thing. And then WWE has a few of those guys around, and usually it's the guys that's been there a long time.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's part of the hierarchy in a wrestling organization.
Yeah. Now, you know, speaking of the hierarchy per se, I heard that, you know, back in the day, a guy like Blackjack Mulligan, per se, I'm not just, you know, talking about Blackjack, a guy like him would be used to enforce the booking for the booker if somebody didn't want to do it.
Well, yeah, I mean, that goes back to that same thing I was talking about. There's always somebody in the locker room, or somebody on the crew that's been there a while usually, and veteran, and they're usually a guy that either usually it's just a matter of respect. Sometimes it's a matter of intimidation, but most of the time it's just a matter of respect that they will listen to. I mean, that was kind of my role in a lot of times when I would take a finish or something to a guy, and I'd have to kind of negotiate with the office a little bit if I had to. Sometimes I didn't agree with y'all. we'd have to kind of find a better way and not go back and negotiate with them, you know. So, in that respect, that's usually how that's done. Now, if somebody just being obstinate or refusing to do something, then somebody like a Blackjack, or in our case, we had guys like Black Bart and other guys. They would step in sometimes and give somebody a talking to if they felt like they were being out of line or ugly, or not doing business the way they should be doing. So, you know, there's guys around like that in every locker room that I've ever been in that are capable of getting the point across that they need to.
Now, was that how Brody was, or was he more for himself rather than the locker room?
Brody was more about taking care of her. If he's close to the office or involved in some way, then he may take that role. But he wasn't a guy that just kind of policed the locker room unless somebody got out of hand or something like that. He wasn't necessarily that guy. But he certainly had the respect, and he certainly could command attention if he felt like he needed to do that, and he would do that occasionally.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's that backs up what I've heard about Brody. So basically, like a locker room leader and a what?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Everything back on. So you would say that like a police officer, like the officer of the locker room and a locker room leader are basically sort of the same thing? Or they can be?
Can be, yeah. I mean, it's different in different places, and different guys have different personalities and different ways to do things. I mean, in WWF, that group, I mean, you got a guy like Mark Calloway that's in there, and he's kind of the high sheriff in that organization, or he was for a long time. He's not as involved now as he used to be.
Yeah.
There was a time when he was the guy that was there, and he was a very quiet kind of guy. He didn't come around and get involved in a lot of things unless he would just ask him. But he commanded a lot of respect, and he would get things done, and probably just talking to somebody or the way he interacted. There's all kinds of different ways to do it. I mean, there was a time when guys like my friend John Layfield was kind of a policeman in the office. A lot of heat for it in some cases, but he was just doing his job. It wasn't expected. And those guys are invaluable. You need those kind of guys in there for a lot of reasons.
Yeah, that's true. I completely agree. I mean, would you mind debunking some myths for me?
If I can, maybe.
Well, I've heard a lot of people say that one of your friends, Mr. Layfield, is guilty of hazing the newer young stars.
He was the head like I said, he had that role. He was the guy that kind of policed things a little bit. And I can't speak for every instance because I wasn't there all the time. But I do know, I know John well enough to know how he is. I do know he had a kind of an old school mentality. If a young guy came in and he was a little too brash or a little too loud or a little too something, he would probably end up in front of John at some point, or somebody like John. And that's just part of that. That's part of that process. And some guys didn't take it very well. And then you start getting a lot of rumors out there about this and about that, and the guy gets called a bully and all this kind of stuff. Well, not necessarily the truth. You know, there's times when he's just sticking up for what he believes and how he believes it needs to be, and sometimes that's what the office wanted.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, I can't speak for every instance. You know, I know there've been several times that something like that has come up, but I do know this. I mean, it's just like the deal with Blue Meanie. I know that was a big deal, you know. And he and Brian Blue Meanie are good buddies now. They're good friends. And there's a lot of times those are just misunderstandings or reactions to the moment, you know, that kind of thing. But if a guy is doing something that's out of line or getting a little out of hand or something like that, and a guy like John or someone else steps in and takes control of the situation, that's just part of the wrestling business. It's part of what happens. And in truth, you really need that sometimes. Some guys come in and disrupt the chemistry and the peace in the locker room, and they need to be called down. And that's what happens sometimes. And then you have to Okay. All I was saying is that you know, sometimes we really don't know all the stories, like we were talking about earlier. And with social media the way it is, and with all the guys out there that tend to think they know so much about the business and all the insiders and all this kind of thing, you get a lot of rumors and a lot of misinformation, and usually a lot of those things get blown out of proportion. And you know, I'm not saying nothing ever happened. I'm just saying that a lot of times it turns into something that really wasn't. And there are a lot of those instances, you know, that get distorted and exaggerated and that sort of thing. So I know this. I know John was well liked in the locker room and in the company. There were a few instances that happened that there became, I guess, some sort of dysfunctional relationship with a couple of guys, you know, that kind of deal. But for the most part, he's, you know, I think those have been resolved, and you go on, you know, you get older, you know, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
You know, he was an invaluable part of that locker room. I do know that for a fact.
Mm-hmm.
And he was just like a lot of other guys like that kind of took it upon themselves or was asked usually, and that's a key too, because sometimes those guys get asked to do that very thing, and you never know that it's coming from the office, you know, and they may not ever admit it. That's what's happened. And, you know, they're asked to kind of police things and maybe call somebody down once in a while, and sometimes feelings get hurt and things get out of control, and there you go. You know, it's a lot of it's just people blowing things up.
Yeah. Now, if, you know, the other one I wanted to ask you about, we can either go, you know, if you want to, you know, say a couple things about it, then that's fine, but all I want to know is how likely you think that it is true, because I know you know both these guys, and I know you basically, I don't want to say, you watch them grow in the business. There's a, you know, story going around, you know, and even some who worked for WWE at the time said it was true, that at WrestleMania 14, the great Undertaker was watching to make sure Shawn Michaels put over Austin, and then if he didn't, he was going to give Michaels an ego check. Let's put it that way.
I couldn't tell you if that's actually true or not. I do know this. I know that Mark was a guy that very much not officially part of the office, but he was actually representing the office in the dressing room and the best interests of the business. I also know that Shawn went through a period of time when he was a little difficult to work with and kind of went his own way about some things. So it's possible that Mark had it in his mind that he was going to make sure that things went the way they're supposed to go. I don't know. I couldn't tell you. But it's not totally out of the realm of possibility that that's true. I know Sean did some funny things there for a while there. He had that one match with Hogan when he just oversold everything. On one hand, it's hilarious, but on the other hand, it was almost like burying the whole thing. But, so, you know, he had his moments when he went a little bit overboard, and it's possible that Mark might have been watching over that at the time. And I just don't know. I couldn't tell you that for sure. Probably have to ask Mark that.
Mm-hmm.
He probably wouldn't tell you.
I mean, I'd love to do that, but I don't know how likely that is. But yeah, you're probably right. He wouldn't tell me anyway.
No.
Well, now we move on to the second part of this video, and that's just the aspect of, do you think that psychology is like a lost part of the business today?
Very much so. That's the biggest part of it. And I've said this over and over again, that the athletes are better than they ever have been. They can do all kinds of things. But, you know, unless when you do those things that it makes sense, and you can actually look back on it and understand what you're trying to tell, then all that athleticism means very little. I think that's missing a lot of times, especially in these matches where they do try to do a big spot. I've seen some stuff posted on the internet that just, you know, I mean, it's amazing from the thing to do, and the moves they make, and the coordination, and the timing, and all that kind of thing, and it's like a big dance. But in the end, that's all you have. You don't have that. You don't have any kind of emotional attachment to it, and that's where the psychology comes. If you don't have psychology in professional wrestling, to me, you don't have anything. And I think that's my biggest gripe about it all. Period. It's not the fact that I think that these guys can't do it. It's the fact that they're not allowed. That bothers me.
Mm-hmm. Well, the biggest gripe with a lot of people from the the decade of the territories, where, you know, psychology was the calling card of the business, is the junior heavyweights. Specifically, I'm going to draw into the match that got a lot of attention, Ricochet versus Will Ospreay. But I want to know from you, since you worked in Japan, what's the difference between Ricochet and Will Ospreay and Dynamite versus Tiger Mask?
There's a lot of difference. I mean, that match that you're talking about, that went all over the internet and everything, is exactly what I was talking about before. They did a lot of amazing things, and you know, when you do all those things, and there's very little selling involved. I mean, whatever selling it is something like register and then go. And in the end, you're almost, your head spinning. You don't know what's happening. And the difference in that and some of the junior heavyweights, you know, the Tiger Mask and the Christian Ligers and the Chris Benoit and the Eddie Guerreros and guys like that, they did a lot of those same moves and just as well and just as impressively. But if you watch their matches, when they get through, you understood what they were trying to say. You know, they were telling you a story. And that's an old adage in wrestling, is telling a story, but that's the truth. That's what it all boils down to. And when you get through with it, when you get through watching one of their matches, you understood what they were trying to say. It made sense to you. And they did. It wasn't just one thing after another. It was like paced in a way and timed in a way that you really could kind of grasp what the story was when you got through it. And when I see some of these matches where it's just one spot after another, and it's obviously just no sell and all dance, you know, that's fine if you want to watch that. But for me, it does nothing. It does nothing for me. After I see it one time, that's all I need to see it. I don't care anymore. And you know, I think a lot of fans will say, "What?" You know, I know there's a lot of young guys that get all hyped up about those things and they talk about how this is what is the chance, this is awesome, and all that kind of crap. You know, it's really not. I mean, the moves are awesome, but the application as far as professional wrestling, as far as it's the way professional wrestling is supposed to applied is totally out of whack. It means nothing. It's just an exhibition. That's all it is. And if that's your cup of tea, that's fine. I don't have any problem with that. It just doesn't mean anything to me.
I can agree with that. I still hate seeing no selling in matches, like, especially, this is nothing against Ring of Honor, but it happens very often in a Ring of Honor ring where they no sell.
Well, let me ask you this. I mean, if you go back and watch a match with, say, a Ricky Steamboat or Ricky Morton or guys of that nature, and watch how their matches unfold and how they tell their tale, and I'm not talking about the selling part of it. How they bring the audience and the fans into the match with them and make them feel something. And then watch some of these other things, and there's a distinct difference in that. There's a distinct difference in how you feel about the match, about the guys. I mean, when the guys are going so fast, you don't have any time to create any kind of feeling for them. I mean, who cares who wins? What difference does it make?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's just and then they hit a guy with all these finishes, and that I mean, my God, how could anybody possibly stand up to 10 or 12 of those finishes like that, and then they just bounce right up and go to another spot.
Mm-hmm.
And when it's all said and done, you not only killed everybody's finish, but you just actually not created any kind of emotional attachment with fans at all. And to me, it just means nothing. I mean, if that's what they want to do, and that's what people enjoy seeing, then by all means, God bless them. But they'll never draw me.
Yeah, and I'll even throw Barry Windham's name into that hat, and Kurt Hennig, to go along with Ricky Morton and Ricky Steamboat.
Yeah, there's a lot of those guys. Just use those guys as examples. So I think a lot of people consider those two guys maybe the premier or elite sellers.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Story days, but if you go back and talk about Eddie Guerrero and Benoit and those kinds of guys, Jushin Liger, Tiger Mask. I mean, when it came time to sell, they sold, and they made the fans feel that. And then when they're on their way back, I mean, everybody's with them and they understand what's going on, and they generate that emotion. And then when it's all over with, it's over with. To me, it's just keep going back to it. It's that emotional connection with fans. And if you don't have that, to me, you don't have anything in wrestling.
Yeah, I can agree with that, and I mean, well, honestly, because in my opinion, this would kind of be a breath of fresh air, because for anybody who listens or watches my videos, they would know that basically in a lot of my videos, especially recently, I've been burying TNA, but now I'm going to bury somebody else or talk negatively about something else, and that is, I'm going to bring up the name of one of your friends, Jim Cornette.
Mm-hmm.
There are a ton of people who think Jimmy is bitter and outdated because of his mentality of how the business should be and not how the business is.
Yeah, well, a lot of people don't know Jimmy very well. I mean, what you see is what you get a lot of times. But honestly, I agree with 95% of the things he said. But, and he'll tell you. It's pretty much the way I just said a while ago. I mean, that's what people want to watch. That's fine, but that's not his cup of tea. And he has a very strong belief about what professional wrestling is supposed to be and what it should represent, and how it should look, and how it should be presented. And in nearly every case, I agree with the way he sees it. Now, there may be specific things that we wouldn't see eye to eye on, but as far as the overall view that professional wrestling is supposed to be something that does something more than just get a pop, and then we're 100% together on that. And Jimmy has a colorful way of expressing himself. I actually I kind of appreciate that at times because he's not afraid to say what's on his mind. I try to be a little bit more diplomatic most of the time, but he doesn't really care for that. And he doesn't bother with it a lot of times. But behind the scenes, he's a very even-keel guy and easy to work with. If you just show him some respect, And, the guys he's got involved with are the guys that just didn't even want to bother to see his point of view, and he can't tolerate that very much.
Yeah.
There's a lot of guys out there, a lot of old school guys that they see a certain way, and that's it. And I can appreciate that.
Yeah. I agree with that. Now, a two-part question. Number one, do you think it's fair for fans to call Jimmy bitter? And part two of that, do you think that it's fair for some people to think that the old school mentality is outdated?
Well, that's just how you look. I mean, if you're talking about old school and that everything has to be the same as it used to be, that's out there. I mean, I've never said that things should stay still. I've never said that things shouldn't progress. There's a lot of things that you can do with the styles that we have today and the athleticism that we have today and the way things are approached today that if you would take that and incorporate some more traditional thinking, looking into that, then I think you'd have a product that people can really relate to. And it'd probably be better than it ever was. So I'm not one of those guys that think that you ought to go back to two guys rolling around in the ring or exchanging holds and plotting and that kind of thing. I think the excitement is great. It's a wonderful thing. Yeah? Athleticism is a wonderful thing. But my God, learn how to use it. And do something more with it than just a dance. And if you want to see a dance or gymnastics exhibition, you can see those anywhere. You go watch gymnastics. That's not what professional wrestling is supposed to be. Professional wrestling is more than that. It's a drama. Mm-hmm. It's a story. When you start leaving that part of it out of it, then you're leaving out the heart of what drew most people, most fans to professional wrestling in the beginning, and why so many guys that are considered old school still love it the way they do. Mm-hmm. Because they had that feeling part and that connection with it. It was an emotional thing. It's not just a thing where you go out and watch some guys fly around the ring and then you don't care anything about it. And you can take all those things and make it progressive and make it better and make it more exciting. But when you leave out the guts, when you leave out the heart, then it doesn't mean anything to me. And that's just me. How I feel. And I don't think that's being stubborn and old school. I think that's just demanding a little bit more out of it than the superficial thing that we get.
Yeah, I can agree with that. I can see your point. And I just I kind of want you to, try and get into the, maybe look at, do you think that Mr. Cornette views it that way, like you said, or do you think that he just wants to, no, let me rephrase that. Do you think that he wants everything to go back how it was in the 80s, or do you think he just wants to pull out the bad, some of the bad stuff and thrust in, like, the psychology and, like, how a little bit more of how things used to be?
I think Jimmy feels exactly the same way I do. He may express it a little bit more emphatically and more colorfully than I do. I think he feels exactly the same way. If he had two great athletes, go back and look at stuff he's booked. He put some great athletes too. He let them do things. He didn't make them exchange holes in the ring. You use what you got. You got great talent that's athletic, then you let them be athletic. But at the same time, you got to demand more of that. You got to demand more than just the aesthetic part. You got to have that heart, that soul, and that emotional connection. And I think Jimmy feels the same way exactly. Now, how he might see it book a match and how I might book a match may be two different things, but I think we both have the same basic traits involved in the match that we're booking. If you gave us two guys, said, I want to get here with it, Jimmy may get there a different way than I get there. But I think we would both incorporate some of the same things, the same logic, the same principles in getting there.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think he would care if the guys did the spots in the middle of it, as long as they told the story the way he wanted it told and got the reaction he wanted to get. And you know, in that respect, I don't think he's bitter. I think he's just disappointed. That's kind of where I am.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. Yeah. James Beard debunking rumors since September of 2016.
Well, you know, I mean, that's another one of those things. You know, people get very passionate about their opinions in wrestling.
Yeah.
Jimmy's very passionate. There's no question about that. But on the other side of the equation, you've got a lot of guys, especially the internet guys, that think they understand the business better than the guys that fit in it. A lot of times they kind of goad those kinds of responses. They almost get to a point where they're poking and sticking a snake. You know, they know they're going to get it. You know, but they're having fun. They think that makes them part of the business and it makes them valid and gives them some kind of credibility when it really makes them stupid. You know, the fact is, you know, guys like Jimmy, Cornette, and I can name a lot of other guys like that understand the principles and what should go into the heart and soul of a wrestling match and a wrestling program should be listened to. You know, I know that some guys are easier to get along with. Some guys are more diplomatic than other guys. But, you know, when you start discounting them as just old school guys who don't know anything or don't care anything or have no sense of diplomacy or change their mind about anything, most of those guys aren't really like that. They're just expressing their opinion on what they see. And what they see is basically the same thing I see. And like I said, it's really more about being disappointed than anything else.
Mm-hmm.
And knowing it can be better.
Yeah. I see your point, and I feel that way too. It's, you know, just unfortunate. Which actually is a good segue into my next question. It's a little bit of a long question, so bear with me. You know, I know a lot of people would say, you know, especially those who grew up in the era, would say that the Attitude Era was a very good era for wrestling. And I'm not going to, you know, attach it like that. I'm going to say it was a very good era because at least you could see the glimpses of psychology, and WWE had awesome sellers during that era. But it seems like as the years went on, all that, you know, the selling, the great sellers, and the psychology slowly but surely drifted away from the product. Do you think that WWE is the reason for the lack of belief that psychology is necessary?
Well, yeah, they have got a huge influence on what goes on now. I mean, from the early 90s, when the territories were kind of pretty much gone, starting to go, only a couple of them hanging on. From that point, and even earlier, before, the influence of WWF has had on the, not only just the product, but on the guys that come into the product, is substantial. I mean, you go out now and go to indie shows anywhere, and they're still trying to do things that the WWE does. And whatever happens to be the flavor of the moment. I mean, they went through the same eras that the WWE went through. You know, after the Hogan era, the Bret Hart era, and then the Steve Stone Cold era, and the PG era, the hardcore era, PG era. I mean, you know, they've had to change and alter things all the time, and a lot of those things had to do with the fact that instead of concentrating on just the stories and the the traditional emotional connection that I keep talking about. They pretty much just kind of follow along with society, and they kind of lost their soul a little bit along the way, and that's what they've influenced a lot of other people in business to do that.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I think it's very unfortunate that, especially with all the people like, Arn Anderson still being there, and Ricky Steamboat still being there, and heck, even Brian James, the Road Dogg, or Brian Armstrong rather, being there, and him being a very good seller during his active wrestling career, and them really not having as much, I guess, influence on the talent as they should in the aspect that we're talking about.
Those are all guys that know. That's the thing that's always baffled me about WWE, the fact that you walk behind the stage and you see the guys that are actually directing the talent. The guys like Arn and Ricky and
Michael Hayes too.
An ending list of guys that Fit Finley. I mean, all those guys. Those are all traditional thinking, great, highly skilled workers in their day. And those are the guys that are instructing the talent. That's not the problem. The problem is the product that's put out there is influenced by the guys that actually come up with the angles and the writing and all of that. That's where the disconnect is. It's not so much. I mean, I go over these indies nowadays, and a lot of guys in NWA, they all understand. They've been trained by some people that understand the traditional values and how to actually work and how to get the fans involved. The problem is a lot of the guys who are in control of the creative side of it don't understand that or can't grasp that or do a very poor job of that, and that's the product you see on TV. So it's a baffling thing that you've got those kinds of guys influencing the talent on one side of the spectrum, and then on the other side, when the curtain goes up, they're asked to do something totally different, and it's frustrating because I know that they got guys back there that understand it. This man understands it. He understands this as well as any of us do. It's just why he's allowed some of the things to go on and be presented the way they're presented. It baffles me. It really does. Because he knows. He knows as well as Arn does. He knows as well as Ricky does. He knows as well as, and Hunter's that way too. Hunter's very traditional. So it's there. It's just not getting out in front of people. At least not with the way it should be. And it takes patience. You can't develop a storyline and an angle and then blow it off the next week or 2 weeks later and expect people to really grasp and care about it. Mm-hmm. It takes time. It takes patience. And when all you're thinking about is how much the segment rating is, you're never going to do that. And that's pretty much the way things are now.
Well, I will say to their credit, NXT is a little bit better than the main roster as far as, being a little bit more traditional.
There's a reason that Hunter controls it. And Hunter is demanding. He allows them to wrestle. He allows them to tell stories.
Yeah.
And that's the difference. And why in the heck they can't see that on the main roster, I don't know. But once they get up there, then they pull them into some kind of weird situation and use them in ways that totally goes against what NXT is proving works.
Yeah.
It doesn't make any sense to me. That's what I'm saying. You go behind the scenes and you see one thing, and then when you see the product out there on TV, it's something else.
Yeah.
And it's disappointing to me. Because I know they know. I know they know.
Yeah.
It's mm-hmm. fact. And then I think part of the problem is the writers get way too much influence. And then also the fact that the aim is the segment aim, and trying to get a pop every second, and that's no way to build something. Mm-hmm. It just never has been.
Yeah.
It's just to me, it's frustrating and disappointing, and I know it could be better. And that's me talking. If Jimmy were talking, he'd have a lot of extra go in there, but he'd say the same thing. That's what I'm saying. There's guys that know that's different how you express it.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll just make a point and then I'll ask you one last question. I also can say this, that I feel like you can see a lot of aspects of Dusty in NXT, especially with Enzo Amore. I don't know if you've seen any of Enzo's work, but I definitely see a lot of Dusty in Enzo, and I even said that on Twitter, and, not to cheap plug myself, but Enzo did acknowledge it. But I can see a lot of Dusty in NXT just by, how NXT is.
Well, NXT is, NXT has a lot of those kinds of influences in the training. They've got a lot of traditional guys that are instructing those guys and guiding those guys, and they're not restricted by whatever the WWE style, WWE approach. And you see sometimes little glimmers of both that maybe they're getting. Somehow they always find a way to screw it up.
Yeah. And my last question is, do you think that WWE becomes more traditional when Vince steps down and, however it works out, if Hunter and Steph take over, or Hunter, Steph and Shane, or Hunter and Shane, or do you think when, for this I'll say, do you think it becomes more traditional when Hunter and Shane take over?
I think if Hunter has his way, that you'll see a lot more of the storytelling, a lot more patience, a lot more wrestling. I think if he has the greatest influence, that's really it. I'm not sure about Stephanie. I don't know. I know they're married, so they're going to have to find a way to get along, I guess. But I kind of suspect that they may be heading into an angle like that right now, just based on what I saw with the finish, where Kevin Owens won his fight. And then I haven't actually watched it for last week. I kind of have a feeling that they may be kind of hinting at a little bit of a discord there, the differences in his way of thinking and the way they've been thinking, the way what they presented in the past. So, they may be heading at an angle with that. I don't know what they'll do with it. If they'll screw it up, then it may be interesting.
Mm-hmm.
We'll have to see.
Yeah. Well, if you're watching or listening or wherever you're hearing this video, if you like the video, then leave a like and subscribe to the channel for more content just like this that you can only find right here at Wrestling Express. I thank you, James, for joining me once again.
You're welcome. Enjoyed it.
And I'll see all the viewers next time.